Hello and welcome back. In this last installment of the sensory lectures, we're going to go ahead and talk about equilibrium. There are two types of equilibrium. The first type is called static equilibrium, and this is equilibrium that senses the position of the head. It helps to maintain posture and stability when the head and body are still. And there's a part called the vestibule, which is composed of two chambers called the utricle and saccule that's going to be involved in this static equilibrium. Each of these chambers have tiny structures in them called maculae. So let's go ahead and look at a picture of what we just talked about. So we can see the vestibule. The vestibule is this big chamber here, and it's going to contain the utricle, which is this chamber here, and then the saccule, which is this chamber over here. Inside of those chambers, there are going to be structures called maculae. Okay, it's the structure here and the structure here. Notice that one of them is horizontal and one of them is vertical. So really, any way that the position of your head changes, we're going to have the ability to sense that with these particular sense organs. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. Notice that the maculae are going to have nerve extensions coming out. So these are going to be extensions of the vestibular nerve, the part of the vestibulocochlear nerve dealing with equilibrium. Okay, so they will send information to the brain about what's going on in regards to the position of the head. This structure right here, or this picture right here, is showing you a maculae. Okay, and then we have basically a blow-up view of it over here. And it's a relatively complex sensory structure. It's kind of interesting. So the sensory structure, of course, has hair cells. These are going to be the sensory cells, which are connected to neurons or branches of the vestibular nerve, so they can carry information to the brain about what's going on in regards to the position of the head. So if you look at the structure in a little bit more detail, these little hair cells are embedded in a gelatinous material that has all of these otoliths, which are little ear rocks, I guess you could say. These are little rocks that are made out of calcium carbonate. And when gravity pulls these structures, when you have a tilt of the head, these little otoliths that are embedded in the gelatinous material are going to move. And when they move, the little hair cells will bend in a particular direction, whatever way the gelatinous material moves. And that movement of those hair cells is going to stimulate them to, send a message down these nerves so that we can send a message to the brain about the movement of the head. So just to recap, these structures are going to be located in the maculae, here in the utricle, and here in the saccule. And let me show you how they bend when you bend the head. Alright, so we have basically the structure set up right here. This one happens to be the macula of the utricle, so it's going to be in a horizontal position. Here you have your gelatinous material with your otoliths. Here the hair cells are nice and upright. But if the lady bends her head, as you can see she did right here, then the position of this gelatinous material is going to basically be pulled down by gravity. And as it does, these hair cells, the little ends parts of these hair cells, bend. And when they bend, they send a message down the vestibulocochlear nerve to the brain to let the brain know that the head is bending forward. Okay, so it's kind of a unique situation there of using this gelatinous material and then the little rocks inside, and then gravity pulling those things down, bending the hair cells, and allowing for the information to be sent to the brain. Okay, so that's static equilibrium. Now let's go ahead and talk about dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium detects motion when the head and body move. This information helps the brain in maintaining balance, as we'll show in the last slide of this lecture. So this dynamic equilibrium is going to be done in the semicircular canals. And so each semicircular canal has a swelling in it called an ampulla. And each ampulla contains sensory organs called a crista ampullaris. And these sensory structures bend with the motion of the head. This sends a signal to the brain about the motion of the body. Okay, so that's kind of like a definition of it. Let's go ahead and look at some of the structures here associated with this dynamic equilibrium. Alright, so up here in this top cartoon, we can see the semicircular canals. Now, any way you can bend your head, you have a semicircular canal that has fluid in it that's going to be able to detect that movement or that bending or motion in your head or body. And so at the base of each of the semicircular canals, we have the sense organs there. So there we have the crista ampularis in each of the endings of or beginnings of the semicircular canals. So if we go ahead and look at the crista ampularis, we have a gelatinous material that has sensory hairs embedded in that gelatinous material. And of course, anytime these sensory hairs bend one way or another, that's going to signal the cell to, send a signal down the vestibular, into the vestibular nerve. So we can tell the brain, what's going on in regards to the position of the body. Now, these semicircular canals, they don't necessarily always bend whenever you have movement. One of them may bend, two of them may bend, maybe the third one doesn't bend. So it's the combination of which of the various crista ampularis are bending that signals the brain as to which way the body is moving. So that sounds pretty complicated, but your brain has some processing units. It has the cerebellum that's going to aid in processing this information in addition to other signals that the body's sending to it. So if we just take a look at how this one works, so we have the one of the semicircular canals here. Of course, it has fluid inside of it. Here's the crista ampularis, the sensory organ. And then if a person bends their head, you can see the fluid in the semicircular canal is going to flow in a particular direction depending upon the movement. And as that fluid moves across the crista ampularis, it's going to bend the crista ampularis, and those sensory hair cells will then send information to the brain about which way it's bending. So when you bend it one way, it might depolarize. When you bend it the other way, it might hyperpolarize. But that signaling information will be sent to the brain so the brain can understand what way your head has moved. And this is a graphic just showing you kind of how the cerebellum is going to take all this information and then send out information to your eyes and to your various muscles of your body to maintain, of course, your body's position when movement is actually occurring. So let's take a look here. So if we just take a look at the kind of like what this graphic is showing you. So input is information about the body's position in space, comes from three main sources, and it's fed into two major processing areas in the central nervous system. So if we take a look here, we have vestibular receptors. Those are going to be receptors of dynamic equilibrium and static equilibrium. We have visual receptors. That's information coming from the retina of the eye. And then we have proprioceptors. That is, we have the muscle spindle organs and then the Golgi tendon organs. And these are going to basically be receptors that are going to send information to these two processing units. We do have vestibular nuclei. These are collections of nerve cells that are going to be in the medulla and the pons, and they will collect information that's coming from all of these different receptors. We have the cerebellum, which is also going to collect information from these three different regions or receptors as well. And between the cerebellum and the vestibular nuclei, they do communicate backwards and forwards. So all that information will eventually be output through the vestibular nuclei. And so the vestibular nuclei are going to use many different nerves. We're going to use basically the various cranial nerves. So cranial nerve number 3, 4, and 6. So that's oculomotor, trochlear, and abducens. And those particular that particular information is going to be sent to your eye so we can control eye movements to aid us in whatever movement we're trying to make. The vestibular nuclei will also use spinal nerves, and it'll also use cranial nerve number 11. And basically, these particular cranial nerves, that is the accessory nerve, and then also the spinal nerves, they're going to control the muscles of the necks and the limbs and the trunk, and that will aid us in basically responding to to whatever we need to do for the movement that's occurring in our body, or the movement that needs to occur in our body as well. Okay, so pretty cool stuff. This dynamic and static equilibrium. Of course, when it goes off, you can get things like vertigo, and that can be very problematic for a human being. Okay, well that ends the lectures on the different various senses, and I will see you next time.